What happens when a racist woman refuses to sit beside a black man, thinking no one will call her out? This is the gripping story of a flight that turned into a battleground against prejudice. From a heated mid-air confrontation to a dramatic courtroom reckoning, see how justice is served and resilience triumphs over hate. You won't believe how it all unfolds. The cabin hummed with the soft drone of air circulation and the murmurs of passengers settling into their seats. Marcus adjusted the strap on his laptop bag, tucking it neatly beneath the seat in front of him. He was seated by the window, appreciating the quiet moments before the flight. His book lay on the tray table, its spine cracked open to a chapter on scaling businesses. It was the type of trip he enjoyed, productive and routine. Karen appeared in the aisle, dragging her carry-on suitcase with a tense grip. Her expression was tight, her eyes scanning the row numbers with irritation. She carried herself with a certain entitlement, a woman used to getting her way in small things that made her world feel orderly and controlled. Spotting her seat, she stopped short, glaring at the man already sitting next to the window. Marcus glanced up briefly, offering a polite smile before returning to his book. Karen's voice came sharp and cold. "Excuse me, I think there's been a mistake." A passing flight attendant paused. "Can I help you?" "I need to change seats," Karen declared, gesturing towards Marcus without looking at him directly. "I shouldn't be sitting here." The attendant checked her chart. "This is the correct seat. Is there a specific issue?" Karen hesitated, her lips pressing together. "I just think this isn't going to work for me." Her tone was deliberate, her meaning clear without being overt. Marcus caught the shift in her voice, the unspoken weight of her words. His chest tightened, but he kept his eyes fixed on the page, pretending not to hear. The flight attendant remained composed. "I'm afraid we're fully booked. Please take your seat so we can prepare for takeoff." Karen's face twisted in frustration, but she complied, huffing as she wedged herself into the middle seat. The cabin's ambient chatter drowned out her muttered complaints, though Marcus caught a word or two. Ridiculous, uncomfortable. The plane door closed with a final hiss, and the attendant's voice announced their imminent departure. Marcus exhaled slowly, mentally preparing for the hours ahead. He thought, or perhaps hoped, the confrontation might end here. It wouldn't. The plane was airborne, its engines roaring as it climbed through the clouds. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and passengers began shifting in their seats. Marcus turned a page in his book, keeping his focus steady, though the tension in the air beside him was impossible to ignore. Karen adjusted herself with exaggerated movements, her elbow brushing against him repeatedly as she shifted her tray table up and down. She let out a loud sigh, glancing towards Marcus as though expecting him to react. He didn't. His quiet composure only seemed to irritate her further. "You'd think people would have the decency to offer up a seat when they know someone else isn't comfortable," Karen muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Her tone carried the air of someone speaking a universal truth rather than an insult. Marcus closed his book, turning to look at her directly for the first time since she sat down. His voice was calm but firm. "Is there something you'd like to say to me?" Karen blinked, caught off guard by his directness. "I'm just saying, some people don't think about how their presence might make others uneasy." She leaned slightly towards the aisle, as if distancing herself further from him. A man across the aisle raised an eyebrow, clearly catching her words. Marcus let the comment hang in the air for a moment before responding. "If you're uncomfortable, that's your issue, not mine." Karen huffed. Unbelievable. She flagged down a flight attendant. "I need to change seats," she demanded, her voice sharp. The attendant, the same one from earlier, approached with practiced patience. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but as I mentioned before, we're fully booked. Everyone needs to remain in their assigned seats." Karen crossed her arms. "I don't think it's safe for me to sit here. I don't know this man, and he's making me feel threatened." The words landed like a weight in the air. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, their murmurs growing louder. The attendant stiffened, but kept her tone professional. "Ma'am, this gentleman hasn't done anything wrong. Please remain seated and refrain from making further remarks." Karen's face reddened. "So, I just have to sit here and feel unsafe. Is that what you're saying? Exactly what is unsafe about me sitting here. Reading my book? Marcus interjected, his voice even but carrying enough strength to cut through the growing tension. Karen turned to him, her indignation spilling over. You're invading my personal space, for one. And frankly, I don't feel comfortable being this close to someone I don't trust. The murmur of voices grew louder. A passenger 2 rows back called out, Lady, he's just sitting there. You're the one making a scene. Karen whipped her head around, glaring at the source of the comment. Stay out of it, she snapped before turning back to the flight attendant. I'm not the problem here. I'm just expressing my concerns. The attendant sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. Ma'am, this is your assigned seat. If you continue disrupting other passengers, I will have to report this. Report me for what? For standing up for myself? Karen's voice rose, the pitch grating as she gestured wildly. This is harassment. Plain and simple. I'm being forced to sit here, and he's intimidating me. A younger woman seated in front turned around. He hasn't said 2 words to you. You're the one making it uncomfortable for everyone else. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her face turning a deeper shade of red. She glanced around, realizing the tide was turning against her. You all have no idea what it's like to feel unsafe. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. You're right, he said softly. I don't know what it's like to feel unsafe sitting next to someone minding their own business. A ripple of laughter and murmured agreement swept through the cabin. Karen shot him a withering glare, but it was clear her audience was no longer on her side. She crossed her arms and turned her face to the aisle, muttering under her breath. The flight attendant gave Marcus an apologetic glance before walking away, clearly deciding not to escalate things further for now. Marcus sighed and reopened his book, though his mind raced. He had dealt with prejudice before, but something about Karen's unrelenting hostility sat heavier than usual. The minutes ticked by, but the atmosphere in the cabin remained charged. Karen shifted in her seat again, making sure her arm brushed against him with each exaggerated movement. Though she stayed quieter, her simmering frustration was palpable. Marcus exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The plane hummed steadily at cruising altitude, but tension gripped row 17. Marcus stared out the window, attempting to focus on the serene expanse of clouds below. Karen, however, was far from calm. Her stiff posture and muttered comments carried the storm brewing within her. This is just so typical, Karen said loudly, ensuring her voice carried over the ambient cabin noise. I don't know why they let things like this happen. Marcus turned his head slightly, giving her a calm but questioning glance. Things like what? Karen met his gaze with thinly veiled disdain. Like forcing people into situations they shouldn't be in. I mean, I paid for this seat expecting a comfortable flight. Marcus closed his book and folded his hands in his lap. Are you uncomfortable because of me? Karen scoffed. I'm just saying. It's not fair to put people in positions where they don't feel safe. Not everyone wants to be packed in next to strangers. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Strangers? Or someone like me? Karen's eyes flicked to him briefly before darting away. Don't twist my words. You know what I mean? I don't, actually, Marcus replied evenly. Why don't you explain? Karen hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Finally she muttered, people like you have no respect for others' space. It's always something. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but carrying an edge. People like me? What exactly does that mean? Karen sighed dramatically, her frustration bubbling over. I don't need to explain myself to you. It's not my fault I don't feel comfortable. A man across the aisle turned to her, his expression incredulous. Lady, he's just sitting there. You're the one making everyone uncomfortable. Karen's head snapped towards him. Mind your own business, she snapped, before turning back to Marcus. It's not personal. I just don't think it's right to cram everyone together like this, especially when you don't know who you're sitting next to. Marcus leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor unwavering. So, you're saying you're uncomfortable because of me, but it's not personal? Karen bristled at the challenge in his tone. Look, I don't know what you're used to, but I'm not the type of person who pretends everything is fine. just to be polite. Clearly, Marcus said quietly, his gaze steady. Karen's face reddened. You think you're so clever, don't you? Always trying to make everything about race. The words landed like a slap in the air, drawing gasps from nearby passengers. Marcus stiffened slightly, but remained composed. I didn't bring up race, he said, his voice low and firm. But now that you have, let me ask you something. What exactly about me is making you uncomfortable? Karen faltered, her eyes darting to the flight attendant walking down the aisle. I shouldn't have to explain myself to you, she said, her voice wavering slightly. It's just, some people have a way of making others uneasy. Uneasy, Marcus repeated, his voice sharp enough to cut through the cabin chatter. You mean people who don't fit into whatever box you've decided is acceptable? Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Around them, passengers murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman leaned over her seat back and said loudly, Why don't you stop talking before you embarrass yourself further? Karen shot her a venomous glare. This isn't about you, she snapped, before turning back to Marcus. You don't understand what it's like to feel unsafe. The absurdity of the statement made Marcus laugh softly, though there was no humor in it. Unsafe? Sitting next to a man reading a book? Do you hear yourself? Karen flushed, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. I knew this would happen. You're trying to make me the bad guy when I'm just being honest. You've made your feelings clear, Marcus replied, his voice calm but pointed. And I'm being honest when I say your discomfort is your problem, not mine. The flight attendant appeared, her expression serious. Is there a problem here? Karen immediately pointed to Marcus. He's harassing me. The attendant frowned, glancing at Marcus, who sat quietly in his seat. From what I've seen, ma'am, he's been sitting quietly. You're the one causing a disturbance. Karen gasped, her indignation palpable. This is outrageous. I'm just expressing how I feel. The flight attendant straightened. I need you to lower your voice and stop disturbing the passengers around you. This is your final warning. Karen's mouth tightened into a thin line, and she leaned back in her seat, muttering under her breath. Marcus exhaled slowly, his patience worn, but his composure intact. Though the confrontation subsided for the moment, Marcus knew it wasn't over. The weight of Karen's hostility lingered in the air, and he braced himself for what might come next. The cabin lights glowed dimly as passengers settled into their routines, but row 17 was anything but calm. Marcus kept his focus on the clouds outside the window, his book resting on his lap, but Karen's simmering anger filled the air. Her muttered comments grew louder, sharper, drawing the attention of those around them. This is exactly what's wrong with society today, Karen said, her voice pitched to Carrie. Some people think they can do whatever they want and make everyone else uncomfortable. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He had heard variations of this before. Coded words, thinly veiled hostility. Finally, he turned to her, his expression calm but firm. If you have something to say to me, say it. Karen's lips twisted into a thin smile, her voice dripping with condescension. Oh, don't play the victim. You're not special. I never said I was, Marcus replied evenly. But you've been going on about this since you sat down. Maybe it's time to stop. Karen's tone hardened. It's not my fault I don't feel safe. Maybe people like you should consider how your presence affects others. The cabin seemed to freeze. A collective silence fell over the passengers within earshot, the weight of her words sinking in. Marcus's fingers tightened around his book, but his voice remained steady. People like me? Go on. What exactly do you mean by that? Karen hesitated, her cheeks flushing as she realized the attention now focused on her. You know exactly what I mean, she snapped. You people always twist everything, making it about race. Marcus leaned back, exhaling slowly. You brought up race, not me. If that's what's really bothering you, maybe you should think about why. The murmurs around them grew louder. A woman 2 rows ahead turned back and said, Lady, you're embarrassing yourself. Just stop. Karen's face darkened with fury. Mind your own business, she snapped. I have every right to speak up when I feel unsafe. Unsafe! the man across the aisle said incredulously. He's been sitting there reading a book. The only person making anyone uncomfortable is you. Karen's eyes darted around the cabin, her anger mounting. This is harassment. I shouldn't have to put up with this. You're all ganging up on me because I'm the only one brave enough to speak the truth. Brave? Marcus said softly, his voice cutting through the chaos. What's brave about making assumptions about someone you don't even know? What's brave about spreading hate? Karen's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me, she hissed. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. The murmurs shifted, passengers shaking their heads or muttering words of disbelief. The young man who had been filming earlier spoke up again. No, you're saying what a racist would think. And now, everyone's seeing it. Karen's head whipped around, her face contorting with rage. You can't record me, she shouted, her voice rising above the hum of the engines. That's illegal. It's not illegal on a public flight, the man replied coolly. And honestly, you should stop before this gets worse for you. Karen stood abruptly, the motion jarring enough to bump her tray table. The drink on it wobbled, spilling onto the armrest. This is unacceptable, she yelled, her voice trembling with fury. I will not be silenced by you people, passengers gasped, some ducking out of the way as Karen gestured wildly. Her rage filled the small cabin, her face flushed with indignation. This is harassment. I'm the victim here. The flight attendant hurried back down the aisle, her expression sharp with warning. Ma'am, I need you to sit down immediately. Karen ignored her, pointing a trembling finger toward Marcus. He's the one causing all this. He's been intimidating me since the moment I sat down. Marcus stayed seated, his voice calm. Intimidating you? By existing? You're trying to provoke me, Karen shouted. This is exactly what people like you do. You create chaos and then act innocent. The flight attendant's voice cut through the noise. Ma'am, this is your final warning. Sit down and lower your voice, or I will be forced to escalate this further. Karen turned on the attendant, her face flushed with indignation. I'm not the one causing the problem. He is. She jabbed a finger toward Marcus, who remained composed. Nearby, passengers exchanged glances, their disbelief growing. Just sit down already, a woman muttered, but Karen didn't sit. Instead, she squared her shoulders, her stance defiant, as if preparing for a battle she was determined to win. Karen remained standing, her body rigid with anger, her voice cutting through the cabin like a knife. I have every right to defend myself against this kind of behavior, she shouted, jabbing a finger in Marcus's direction. This is harassment, plain and simple. Passengers leaned into the aisle, some whispering, others staring in disbelief. A middle-aged man seated nearby shook his head and muttered to the woman beside him, This is unreal. The flight attendant stepped forward, her tone firm. Ma'am, you need to sit down immediately. You are creating a disturbance. Karen whirled around to face her, her hands shaking. A disturbance? Me? I'm standing up for my safety. This man, she pointed again at Marcus, has been intimidating me this entire flight. Marcus, still seated, spoke calmly but firmly. You're lying. The only thing I've done is exist in this seat. You've been hostile since the moment you walked on board. Karen's face twisted in indignation. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me, she shrieked. I won't let you manipulate the situation like that. At that moment, a passenger in the row behind Marcus stood. She was a younger woman, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, her face etched with disgust. Lady, we've all been sitting here watching you lose your mind over nothing. Nobody's buying your act. Just sit down. Karen turned on the woman, her voice dripping with venom. Oh, of course you'd side with him. You people are all the same, always jumping to conclusions without knowing the full story. The younger woman's jaw dropped. Are you serious right now? You're doubling down on this garbage? Karen ignored her, addressing the flight attendant with a frantic wave of her arms. I demand to speak to someone in charge. This is outrageous. He's dangerous, and no one is listening to me. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, frustration building among the passengers. A man across the aisle leaned out, his tone sharp. The only dangerous thing here is your attitude, lady. Sit down before you get thrown off this plane. Karen glared at him, her face bright red. "How dare you? You have no idea what I've been through." The flight attendant stepped closer, her patience clearly at its limit. "Ma'am, I'm giving you one last warning. Sit down now, or I will have to call security upon landing. This behavior is unacceptable." Karen scoffed, her indignation bubbling over. "Call security? I'd love to see how they explain letting someone like him make me feel unsafe." Marcus exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You're digging yourself a deeper hole with every word." Karen snapped back. "Oh, don't pretend to be some kind of saint. You've been antagonizing me this whole time with your smug attitude." At this, a middle-aged man seated a few rows ahead stood, turning to address the cabin. "Look, this guy's done nothing but sit quietly and read his book. She's the one causing all the trouble. We've all seen it." His words drew murmurs of agreement from the other passengers. Karen's eyes darted around, her rage shifting into a flicker of fear as the reality of her isolation set in. But rather than backing down, she clenched her fists and took a step closer to Marcus, her voice rising again. "You think you're so clever," she spat, her words trembling with fury. "But people like you always think you can push the limits and get away with it." Marcus raised his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture of calm. "I'm not pushing anything. You're the one making a scene." Karen took another step forward, her gestures wild. "Oh, you'd love to paint me as the villain, wouldn't you? That's what you people do. Always turning it around, always playing the victim." Passengers gasped, the blatant racism sending a shockwave through the cabin. A young man seated nearby pulled out his phone, aiming it squarely at her. "Yup, you're going viral for this. Keep going." Karen's face twisted with fury as she lunged toward the phone, her arm outstretched. "Turn that off! You have no right to film me." The man leaned back in his seat, holding the phone just out of her reach. "I have every right to film a public meltdown. Keep it up. You're making my day." The flight attendant stepped between them, her voice now commanding. "Ma'am, sit down now. This is your final warning." Karen stood frozen for a moment, her chest heaving, her eyes darting wildly as if searching for someone to take her side. But the passengers around her were united in their disdain, their expressions a mix of frustration and disbelief. "You're all against me," she muttered, her voice trembling with rage. "This is exactly the problem with this world. No one listens to the truth anymore." The flight attendant pointed to her seat. "Ma'am, sit. Down. Now." Karen didn't move, her defiance clear, her body tense as if preparing to lash out again. Marcus exhaled deeply, his gaze steady as he looked at her. He didn't want this fight, but he wouldn't shy away from it either. The storm wasn't over. It was about to explode. The tension in row 17 had reached a boiling point. Karen stood trembling with rage, her fists clenched, her face red with fury. Her voice, shrill and venomous, rose above the hum of the engines as she pointed at Marcus. "This is exactly why people like you shouldn't be allowed to fly with the rest of us," she shouted, her words slicing through the cabin like a blade. "You're all the same, loud, entitled, and always looking for trouble." Marcus remained seated, his body tense but composed. "I've done nothing but sit here and read a book," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're the one making this into an issue." Karen's eyes widened in mock disbelief. "Oh, please, don't play innocent with me. You've been sitting there, looking smug, thinking you're better than everyone else. You people always think the rules don't apply to you." A collective gasp rippled through the passengers. The murmurs of disbelief and outrage grew louder, but Karen didn't care. She took a step closer to Marcus, her finger now inches from his face. "You're nothing but trouble," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "Every time someone like you shows up, there's a problem. Always demanding respect you haven't earned. Always expecting handouts." Marcus looked up at her, his jaw tight. "If anyone here is disrespectful, it's you," he said quietly. "You're out of control, and you're embarrassing yourself." Karen's face twisted in fury. "Embarrassing myself? You don't belong here. People like you should stick to where you came from." The cabin fell into stunned silence. A passenger a few rows back muttered, "What the hell is wrong with her?" Karen ignored the growing outrage around her. "You think you can sit there and act like you're better than me? Like you're equal to me? You're not. You never will be." Marcus exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the armrests. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through her tirade. "You've made it clear what kind of person you are. Now sit down." But Karen didn't sit. Her fury boiled over, and in a sudden wild motion she lunged at Marcus. Her hands clawed at his shirt as she screamed, "You don't deserve to be here!" Passengers erupted into chaos. "Hey, stop her!" someone yelled, as Karen grabbed at Marcus's arm, trying to pull him forward. Marcus leaned back, raising his arms defensively. "Get off me!" he said, his voice steady but firm. The flight attendant rushed toward them, her voice urgent. "Ma'am, stop immediately!" Karen thrashed, her nails raking across Marcus's arm. "You think you can intimidate me? You people are all the same. Nothing but thugs!" Two passengers jumped up to intervene. The young man who had been filming earlier grabbed Karen's arm, pulling her back. "That's enough!" he shouted. "You're out of control!" Another man from across the aisle stepped in, grabbing her other arm to restrain her. Karen struggled against their grip, screaming incoherently. "Let me go! This is assault! I'm the victim here!" The flight attendant, now visibly shaken but resolute, stepped between them. "Ma'am, you need to stop right now. You're a danger to the passengers and the crew." Karen twisted in the men's grasp, her voice rising in a piercing wail. "This is discrimination. I'm being attacked for standing up for myself." "Standing up for yourself?" a woman nearby scoffed. "You just attacked him. You're insane." Karen's eyes darted wildly around the cabin, searching for support. "You're all against me because I dared to speak the truth," she screamed. "This is what happens when you let people like him in spaces they don't belong." The murmurs of disbelief turned into open condemnation. "Get her off this plane!" someone shouted. The flight attendant signaled to a crew member, who quickly returned with zip ties. "We need to restrain her until we land," she said firmly. Karen's struggles grew more frantic as the zip ties were applied to her wrists. "You can't do this! This is illegal! You're all going to regret this." The passengers who had helped restrain her forced her back into her seat, her wrists now bound. She glared at Marcus, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won? You think this is over? You're going to pay for this. You people always do." Marcus shook his head, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "The only person paying for anything here is you." The flight attendant leaned down to Marcus. "Sir, I'm so sorry for what you've endured. We've reported this, and law enforcement will handle her when we land." Marcus nodded, his voice quiet. "Thank you." Karen slumped back into her seat, her muttering continuing under her breath. Passengers around her glared or shook their heads in disgust. Marcus turned back to the window, staring out at the endless clouds. For now, the storm inside the cabin had calmed, but the fallout was far from over. The cabin buzzed with nervous energy as passengers whispered and exchanged glances. Though Karen was now restrained in her seat, her rage hadn't subsided. She sat fuming, her face flushed, her bound wrists trembling against her lap. The tension was suffocating. Marcus tried to regain his composure, his gaze fixed out the window, but Karen's voice broke the fragile silence. "You think you're so righteous, don't you?" she spat. "Sitting there, acting like the victim when you're the one causing all this trouble." Marcus turned his head slowly, his patience stretched thin. "You attacked me, and now you're trying to play the victim?" His voice, though measured, carried a sharp edge. "You're unbelievable." Karen leaned forward as much as her restraints allowed, her voice rising. "Don't you dare lecture me! You people think you can walk around demanding respect when you've done nothing to earn it. I've worked hard for everything I have. Unlike you." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, passengers shaking their heads in disbelief. "Someone shut her up already," a man in the back muttered. Marcus set his book aside and turned to face Karen fully. "I've worked hard for everything I have, too," he said, his voice louder now. And I'm not going to sit here and let you insult me, because you can't handle being called out. Karen's eyes blazed with fury. Oh, spare me the lecture. You think the world owes you something because of your sob story? Guess what? It doesn't. Marcus's restraint snapped. He raised his voice, his words cutting through the cabin. The world doesn't owe me anything, but it sure as hell doesn't owe you the right to treat me like I don't belong here. Your entitlement is disgusting. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the confrontation. Some murmured their support for Marcus, while others called out for the crew to intervene. Karen, undeterred, pushed harder. Disgusting! That's rich coming from you, she yelled, her voice shrill. You don't even deserve to be on this plane. You're lucky they even let you on board. Marcus's voice rose further, matching her intensity. Let me on board? I paid for this seat just like everyone else. You're the only one who seems to think you're above the rules. The flight attendant appeared again, her face pale but determined. That's enough, she shouted, stepping between them. Both of you need to stop yelling. This is a safety issue now. Karen ignored her, straining against the zip ties as she continued her tirade. He's the problem. I wouldn't have had to say anything if he hadn't made me feel unsafe. He's been provoking me from the start. Marcus leaned forward, his voice unwavering. You felt unsafe because I exist. That's on you, not me. The flight attendant raised her hands, her voice firm. Ma'am, you've left us no choice. We're moving you to the back of the plane until we land. Karen's face contorted in disbelief. You can't do that. I paid for this seat. You can't just shove me in the back like I'm some kind of criminal. You attacked another passenger, the attendant said, her voice cold and authoritative. This is non-negotiable. Karen's protests grew louder, her voice reaching a fever pitch. This is a violation of my rights. He's the one who started it. I demand to stay here. Passengers jeered from their seats, some shouting, "Get her out of here!" while others clapped sarcastically. Two more crew members arrived, their faces set with determination. They unfastened Karen's seatbelt and helped lift her from the seat. She squirmed and shouted as they guided her toward the back of the plane, her feet dragging along the aisle. You're all going to regret this, she yelled, her voice echoing through the cabin. I'll have your jobs for this, every single one of you. As Karen was escorted to the rear, passengers erupted into applause. A young woman nearby turned to Marcus and said, about time they got rid of her. Marcus offered a tight smile, but said nothing. His adrenaline was still pumping, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. The flight attendants secured Karen in a seat at the back of the plane, where she continued to shout at anyone within earshot. This isn't over! You'll all see. I'm not the bad guy here. Back in row 17, Marcus took a deep breath, his heart still racing. He looked out the window again, trying to find solace in the endless stretch of sky. A man across the aisle leaned over and said, You handled that better than I would have. She's unhinged. Marcus nodded, but didn't respond. Inside, he was replaying the confrontation, the weight of Karen's words heavier than he cared to admit. The anger, the humiliation, it was all too familiar. For now, the cabin had calmed, but the echoes of the argument lingered. Marcus knew the fallout wasn't over. Not yet. The plane's descent was smooth, but the atmosphere in the cabin remained tense. Marcus sat quietly, his hands resting on his lap as he stared out the window. The announcement from the cockpit about the upcoming landing was met with a collective sigh of relief from the passengers. Many exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. In the back of the plane, Karen's muttering had escalated into intermittent bursts of shouting. Her bound hands wriggled against the restraints, and her eyes darted wildly around the cabin. This is illegal! You can't treat me like this, she bellowed. I'll sue every one of you! Passengers near the rear winced at her shrill voice, a few groaning audibly. Is she ever going to shut up? One man muttered, shaking his head. Marcus heard her faintly from his seat, but he tuned her out. His shoulders sagged slightly as the adrenaline from the earlier confrontation began to wear off. The flight attendant had quietly reassured him moments ago that security had been alerted and would handle everything upon arrival. The plane touched down with a soft thud, and a ripple of relief passed through the cabin. The usual clicks of seat belts being unfastened were absent. No one dared to move until the situation at the back was resolved. As the plane taxied to the gate, a pair of uniformed security officers boarded swiftly. The cabin grew silent as passengers turned to watch them. Their authoritative presence filled the narrow aisle as they made their way to the rear. Their expressions professional, but firm. Karen's reaction was immediate and explosive. "What are they doing here?" she shrieked, her voice piercing through the quiet. She yanked against her restraints, her movements jerky and frantic. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you targeting me?" The lead officer approached her calmly but firmly. "Ma'am, we need you to remain seated and cooperate. You've been reported for causing a disturbance and assaulting another passenger." Karen's face twisted in disbelief. "This is a joke, right? I'm the victim here. That man—" She craned her neck to look toward Marcus. "He provoked me. He started this whole thing." Marcus stayed seated, his face impassive, refusing to engage with her further. A flight attendant stepped forward and addressed the officers. "She's been disruptive since the beginning of the flight and physically attacked another passenger. We restrained her for everyone's safety." Karen's voice grew louder, tinged with desperation. "I'm not the problem. He is. Why are you listening to them? They're lying." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we're going to escort you off the plane. If you resist, additional charges will be filed." "I'm not going anywhere," Karen shouted, her voice cracking. "You can't make me. This is a setup. It's discrimination." Passengers began murmuring, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others openly mocking her. "Just get her off already," a woman muttered. "We've had enough." Karen's protests turned into frantic screams as the officers unfastened her restraints and helped her stand. She thrashed against their grip, her feet skidding against the floor. "Get your hands off me! This is illegal! I'll sue every one of you." The officers remained professional, their grips firm but not rough. "Ma'am, calm down," one of them said. "We're not going to hurt you, but you need to cooperate." Karen's voice hit a new pitch. "Cooperate? With this circus? You're ruining my life for no reason." As the officers began leading her down the aisle, she continued to resist, her shouts echoing through the cabin. Passengers leaned away as she passed, some rolling their eyes, others recording on their phones. "I hope you all enjoy ruining an innocent person's life," she screamed. "This isn't over. I'll make sure every one of you pays for this." When Karen passed Marcus's row, she twisted her neck to glare at him. Her eyes burned with fury as she spat. "This is your fault. You'll regret this. You people always ruin everything." Marcus met her gaze, his expression calm but resolute. He didn't respond, letting her words hang in the air. She was quickly ushered toward the exit, her protests fading as the officers guided her off the plane. Once Karen was gone, the cabin seemed to exhale collectively. A passenger near Marcus said, "Good riddance. That woman was out of her mind." The flight attendant approached Marcus, her voice quiet but kind. "Sir, we're sorry for what you had to go through. We've documented everything, and the airline will follow up. Security has her in custody now." Marcus nodded, his voice steady but tired. "Thank you." The other passengers began murmuring, some offering Marcus words of support as they collected their belongings. Though the ordeal was over, the weight of the confrontation lingered. As Marcus stood to gather his bag, he noticed the sympathetic looks and subtle nods from those around him. For now, Karen was gone. But the repercussions of her actions were just beginning. The plane had finally emptied, the passengers filing out with a mix of relief and lingering frustration. Marcus waited quietly near the gate, his carry-on bag at his feet. He had been asked to remain for a brief discussion with airport security about the incident. The tension from the flight still sat heavily in his chest, but he maintained a calm exterior. Karen, on the other hand, was not so composed. Across the terminal, she stood flanked by two security officers, her wrists no longer bound but her movements restricted. Her voice, however, carried clearly across the space. "This is an outrage!" she bellowed. "I've done nothing wrong, And now you're treating me like a criminal. This is harassment." One of the officers spoke firmly but calmly. "Ma'am, we've received statements from multiple passengers and crew members. Your behavior during the flight was unacceptable. You'll need to remain here for further questioning." Karen's face flushed, her anger spilling over. "Questioning? You should be questioning that man. He's the one who started everything. This is a setup." Her voice grew louder as she noticed passengers from the flight watching the scene unfold. Some had their phones out, discreetly recording. Others openly shook their heads in disbelief. Marcus watched from his seat, his expression unreadable. He wasn't interested in engaging with her further, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just about the confrontation. It was about holding someone accountable for their actions. A flight attendant approached him, her demeanor professional but empathetic. "Mr. Harris," she began softly, "thank you for your patience. Security will handle everything from here, and the airline is fully cooperating. If you'd like, we can arrange for a car to take you home." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. I just want this to be over." As the attendant walked away, another passenger approached, a young woman who had been seated nearby during the incident. She offered him a small smile. "I just wanted to say, you handled that a lot better than I would have." That woman was completely out of line. Marcus gave a small nod. "Thanks. I just did what I could to keep calm." "She made a fool of herself," the woman continued. "I'm glad people were recording. She won't be able to spin this in her favor." Across the terminal, Karen's tirade continued. "You'll all regret this," she shouted at the officers. "I'll sue this airline, the flight crew, everyone. I've never been treated this badly in my life." A man who had been on the flight chuckled as he passed by. "Lady, you did this to yourself," he said under his breath, shaking his head. Karen whipped around, glaring at him. "Excuse me? How dare you?" The officer placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down." "I'm perfectly calm," she snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "But this whole thing is a sham. That man provoked me, and now I'm the one being punished? It's ridiculous." A security supervisor joined the scene, carrying a clipboard and looking unimpressed. "Ma'am," he said sternly, "we've reviewed statements from the flight crew and multiple passengers. Based on the evidence, you'll be temporarily detained for assault and disruptive behavior. Further legal action will depend on the outcome of our investigation." Karen's jaw dropped. "Detained? Are you serious? For defending myself?" The supervisor's tone didn't waver. "Assaulting another passenger and causing a disruption is not self-defense. You'll have an opportunity to provide your side of the story, but for now, you need to cooperate." Karen's voice broke into a higher pitch. "This is unbelievable. I'm the victim here." Marcus watched the scene quietly, feeling a mix of vindication and exhaustion. He didn't want to revel in her downfall, but the sight of her being held accountable offered a small measure of closure. As the officers led Karen toward a secure area, her protests echoed through the terminal. "You're all against me. This isn't over. I'll make sure every one of you pays for this." A passenger nearby muttered, "I think she's the only one paying here." Marcus allowed himself a faint smirk, though the weight of the experience lingered. He picked up his bag and made his way toward the exit, his steps heavy but resolute. The ordeal had been draining, but he knew this was only the beginning of the fallout. The video of Karen's meltdown spread across social media like wildfire. Recorded from multiple angles by passengers, her tirade, racist remarks, and physical attack on Marcus had been uploaded before the plane even finished taxiing to the gate. Within hours, hashtags like Plane Karen and Airborne Racism began trending. Karen woke up the next morning to chaos. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls, messages, and notifications. She groggily picked it up, squinting at the screen, only to see a flood of missed calls from her employer and texts from acquaintances. The first headline she saw stopped her cold. "Woman removed from flight after racist tirade. Goes viral." Her stomach churned as she scrolled through the article. It included snippets of the video, quotes from passengers condemning her behavior, and links to multiple viral posts. Her face was plastered everywhere. Mid-scream, mid-lunge, her anger immortalized for the world to see. "No, no, no," she muttered, her voice trembling as she frantically swiped through the comments. Each one felt like a dagger. "She's disgusting. I can't believe people like this still exist. She should be arrested and fired." Karen's heart raced as she opened her email, hoping to find something, anything that could salvage her spiraling situation. Instead, she was met with a curt message from her company's HR department. Subject: urgent. Immediate suspension. Karen, due to the recent incident involving your behavior on a public flight, which has been widely shared online, we are placing you on immediate suspension, pending an internal review. Please do not report to the office until further notice. Regards, Human Resources. "No, this can't be happening," Karen whispered, her voice cracking. "They can't do this to me." A call from an unknown number interrupted her panic. She hesitated before answering, her voice shaky. "Hello? Karen Thompson?" The voice on the other end was cold and professional. "Yes, this is she. This is Officer Richards from the Municipal Police Department. We've been informed of your behavior on Flight 327. We'll need you to come down to the station for questioning regarding allegations of assault and disorderly conduct." Karen's knees buckled. "Assault? Disorderly conduct? Are you kidding me? That man provoked me." The officer's tone remained unyielding. "Ma'am, you were recorded physically attacking another passenger and disrupting the flight. You'll have an opportunity to explain yourself, but we strongly advise you to consult an attorney." Karen hung up, her hands trembling. Tears streamed down her face as she sank onto the couch, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She grabbed her laptop and opened social media, desperate to control the narrative. She typed a lengthy post, attempting to paint herself as the real victim. "I'm being unfairly targeted by cancel culture. The videos don't show the whole story. I was provoked, manipulated, and left defenseless in a situation where I felt threatened. To anyone who knows me, you know I am not a racist. This has all been blown out of proportion." The backlash was immediate. "You felt threatened by a man reading a book? Not a racist. The video says otherwise. Just apologize and disappear already." Karen slammed the laptop shut, her breathing shallow. Nothing was working. The more she tried to defend herself, the worse things became. News outlets picked up her post, dissecting every word, and late-night talk shows mocked her on their broadcasts. Memes flooded social media, each one more brutal than the last. Her world was crumbling. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Family members distanced themselves, ashamed of her actions. Even her neighborhood became hostile. Neighbors whispered behind her back, and someone spray-painted "racist" on her fence. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed quiet about the ordeal. His lawyer had advised him not to engage with the media, but the support he received was overwhelming. Strangers sent messages of solidarity, and civil rights groups offered to help him pursue legal action. His attorney filed a civil suit against Karen for damages, citing emotional distress, defamation, and assault. Karen, already drowning in public scorn, now faced the prospect of financial ruin. "This isn't fair," she whispered to herself one night, staring at the legal notice in her hands. "He's ruining my life." But deep down, Karen knew the truth. She had ruined her own life. Karen sat in the holding cell, the metallic chill of the bench seeping through her thin blouse. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, wrists aching from the earlier restraints. The faint murmur of voices and the occasional clink of keys from the officers nearby grated on her nerves. She had spent the night tossing and turning on the hard cot, replaying the events of the flight in her mind. "This is a nightmare," she muttered under her breath, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "They can't treat me like this." An officer approached the cell, his expression neutral as he unlocked the door. Karen straightened, her indignation bubbling just beneath the surface. "Finally, are you here to release me? This has gone on long enough." The officer ignored her tone. "You're being processed for questioning. Follow me." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line as she stood. Her heels clicked against the cold tile floor, each step heavy with defiance. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice rising as they moved through the station. "That man provoked me. I was defending myself. The officer didn't respond," his silence only fueling her frustration. "You're making a huge mistake," she snapped, her voice echoing in the hallway. "I didn't do anything wrong." They entered a small, sterile room where a pair of officers sat behind a metal table. One gestured for her to sit. Karen hesitated before complying, crossing her arms as she glared at them. "I hope you know I'm not answering any questions without my lawyer." The lead officer leaned forward, placing a file on the table. "That's your right, ma'am. Just know that we have statements from multiple passengers and crew members, along with video evidence of the incident." Karen's jaw clenched as her heart began to race. "Video evidence? That's absurd! Those people are lying. They're all against me." The officer opened the file, sliding a series of printed stills from the video across the table. Each one captured her actions on the plane. Pointing angrily at Marcus, lunging toward him, restrained by passengers. Her expression in every image was one of unfiltered rage. Karen's face burned as she stared at the photos. "This doesn't show the whole story," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "He antagonized me. He made me feel unsafe." The second officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, folded her hands. "From what we've reviewed, you escalated the situation. You'll have a chance to explain yourself in court, but the charges against you are serious." Karen's indignation flared. "Serious? I'm the victim here. That man, he was sitting there, acting smug, looking at me like I was the problem." The female officer raised an eyebrow. "And your response was to attack him?" Karen stammered, her confidence wavering. I was defending myself. He was trying to intimidate me." The officers exchanged a glance before the lead officer spoke. "Ms. Thompson, you're facing charges of assault, disorderly conduct, and interfering with a flight crew. Based on the evidence and statements, these charges will move forward. You'll remain in custody until your arraignment." Karen shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You can't do this. I'm not a criminal. I was protecting myself." The officers remained calm, their expressions unyielding. "Your lawyer will have the opportunity to present your case," the woman said. "For now, you'll return to holding." Karen's protests echoed as the officer escorted her back to the cell. Her heels clicked sharply, each step a reflection of her rising panic. "This is all wrong," she muttered. "I'll sue every one of you for this." The officer didn't respond, leaving her to stew in the cold silence of the cell once more. Karen sank onto the bench, her confidence crumbling. The stark reality of her situation pressed down on her, suffocating and inescapable. Hours later, Marcus sat across from his lawyer in a quiet office. The weight of the previous day's events lingered in the lines of his face, but his resolve was steady. The lawyer reviewed the evidence, nodding as he organized his notes. The videos and statements painted a clear picture, one that left no room for Karen's justifications. "This isn't just about what happened to you," the lawyer said, his tone calm but firm. "It's about holding her accountable. People like her need to understand there are consequences." Marcus nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the edge of his chair. "I didn't ask for any of this, but I won't let her get away with it." The lawyer leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "With the charges she's facing, the criminal case will take precedence. But once that's settled, we'll move forward with the civil suit. Her actions can't go unchecked." Marcus exhaled, a small measure of relief easing the tension in his shoulders. For the first time since the incident, he felt the faint stirrings of justice on the horizon. Karen's arraignment drew a small crowd at the courthouse, a mix of reporters, curious onlookers, and passengers from the flight who had chosen to follow through on their statements. Her name and face had become infamous over the past few days, plastered across headlines and social media feeds. As she was escorted into the courtroom, her face was pale, her expression a volatile mix of anger and fear. The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed woman with an air of authority, wasted no time laying out the charges: assault, disorderly conduct, and interference with a flight crew. Karen sat stiffly next to her attorney, a man whose demeanor suggested he was used to handling volatile clients. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Karen's lawyer rose, prepared to plead not guilty, but the prosecutor preempted him by presenting the evidence. "Your Honor, we have multiple corroborating accounts from passengers and crew, as well as clear video evidence of the defendant's behavior. The severity of her actions endangered the safety of everyone on board." The judge's eyes flicked over the file, his expression impassive. "Ms. Thompson, do you understand the charges against you?" Karen stood abruptly, her lawyer's hand barely grazing her arm in an attempt to keep her seated. "Your Honor, this is a complete misunderstanding. I was provoked. That man made me feel unsafe, and I was defending myself." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "The defendant's claims are directly contradicted by every witness and the video evidence, which shows her initiating the confrontation and escalating it to physical violence." Karen's face reddened as she turned to the prosecutor. "You weren't there. You don't know what it was like. He was threatening me with his presence." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom, some audible gasps punctuating her outburst. The judge rapped his gavel once, his tone sharp. "Ms. Thompson, you will remain silent unless addressed." Karen slumped back into her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her lawyer, visibly flustered, quickly whispered something to her, but she waved him off. The prosecutor continued, her tone precise. "Your Honor, given the severity of the charges and the defendant's inability to acknowledge her behavior, we recommend that she remain in custody or post a substantial bail." Karen's lawyer attempted to argue for leniency, citing her lack of a prior criminal record, but the judge seemed unimpressed. "Bail is set at $25,000, he declared, his gavel striking the sound block with finality. "Next hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks. The defendant will remain in custody unless bail is posted." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief as officers moved toward her. "No! This isn't fair! I'm not a criminal! You're all against me!" Her protests echoed as she was led out of the courtroom, her attorney trailing behind with a look of quiet exasperation. Cameras flashed as reporters jotted down every word of her outburst, the spectacle further solidifying her downfall. Meanwhile, Marcus watched from a bench at the back of the courtroom, his expression neutral. He had chosen to attend the hearing not for a sense of vindication, but to ensure that the process was fair and transparent. Yet, as Karen was escorted out, her words lingering in the air, he couldn't help but feel a pang of exhaustion. He stepped out into the hallway, the cool air of the courthouse a stark contrast to the tension inside. A journalist approached him cautiously, microphone in hand. "Mr. Harris, do you have any comment on today's proceedings?" Marcus hesitated before shaking his head. "No comment," he said quietly, walking away without looking back. The courthouse steps were crowded with onlookers, their conversations buzzing with the aftermath of the hearing. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his shoulders squared but his mind racing. The weight of the incident still pressed heavily on him, though the sight of Karen facing tangible consequences offered a measure of relief. As he reached the parking lot, his lawyer caught up to him. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The criminal case will likely conclude quickly, given the evidence, but our civil suit will take more time." Marcus nodded. "I just want this to send a message," he said. "People like her can't keep getting away with this." The lawyer gave him a small, reassuring smile. "It already is. The world is watching." For now, Marcus focused on the road ahead. Justice was a slow process, but it was in motion. The days leading up to Karen's trial were marked by a storm of media attention and public scrutiny. News outlets dissected every detail of the flight, replaying the videos endlessly. For Marcus, the time passed in quiet anticipation. He avoided the cameras and questions, focusing instead on preparing for his court appearance. Justice wasn't guaranteed, but he was determined to see it through. Karen, however, spent those days in turmoil. Her public defenders had urged her to cooperate, but her indignation left little room for reason. The courthouse steps were crowded as the day arrived, with reporters eager to capture the moment. Inside the courtroom, the mood was tense, the weight of the case pressing down on everyone present. The judge called the room to order. "We're here today to determine the resolution of the charges against Karen Thompson, including assault, disorderly conduct, and interference with a flight crew. Are both parties ready to proceed?" Marcus's lawyer stood first, her tone measured but firm. "Yes, Your Honor." Karen's attorney rose next, a slight hesitation betraying his unease. "We're ready, Your Honor." The prosecutor began by presenting a detailed account of the events, supported by witness statements and the damning video evidence. Clips of Karen's outbursts and her physical assault on Marcus played on a screen for the court. Gasps rippled through the gallery as Karen's actions were laid bare. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded, "this is not a case of misunderstanding or provocation. Ms. Thompson's behavior endangered the safety of everyone on board and targeted the victim, Mr. Harris, in a racially charged and violent manner. We ask for a guilty verdict on all charges and an appropriate sentence to reflect the severity of her actions." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face reddening as the weight of the evidence pressed down on her. Her lawyer stood, attempting to frame her behavior as a momentary lapse in judgment. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record and deeply regrets the events of that day. We ask for leniency in sentencing, as she is already facing significant personal and professional consequences." The judge's gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. "Does the victim wish to make a statement?" Marcus rose, his movements deliberate. He walked to the front of the courtroom, his presence commanding yet calm. Turning to face the judge, he spoke clearly, his voice unwavering. "Your Honor, what happened on that plane wasn't just about me. It was about an attitude, a mindset that people like Ms. Thompson think they can carry without consequence. She tried to humiliate me, to make me feel small, but what she really did was show the world who she is. I hope this court shows her that actions have consequences, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever had to deal with someone like her." He returned to his seat, the room silent except for the faint scribbling of a court reporter's notes. The judge leaned forward, his voice measured. "Ms. Thompson, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Your actions on that flight were unacceptable, dangerous, and rooted in prejudice. The court finds you guilty on all charges. Given the seriousness of the offenses, I'm sentencing you to 90 days in jail, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory anger management counseling. You will also be required to pay restitution to the victim for the emotional and physical harm you caused." Karen gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Your Honor, please, this is too much. I've already lost my job, my reputation. I don't deserve this." The judge's gavel came down sharply. "This court has ruled. Your behavior warrants these consequences. Bailiff, please escort the defendant." As the officers approached, Karen turned to her lawyer, her voice panicked. "Do something! You can't let this happen." Her attorney avoided her gaze, gathering his papers without a word. Karen was led away, her protests fading as the doors closed behind her. Marcus sat silently for a moment, the gravity of the moment settling over him. His lawyer leaned toward him. "This is a win, Marcus. Justice was served." He nodded slowly. "It's a step forward." As he left the courtroom, reporters rushed toward him, microphones extended, cameras flashing. He paused briefly, his voice calm but firm. "I have no comment. Let the verdict speak for itself." Stepping into the cool air outside the courthouse, Marcus felt a weight lift. It wasn't a complete victory, not in the larger sense, but it was enough for today. For now, justice had been served. He paused on the steps, watching reporters scatter and onlookers murmur among themselves. For a moment, the noise faded into the background, and his thoughts drifted back to the plane, to the way Karen had looked at him, spoken to him, dismissed his existence as though it held less value. It wasn't the first time he had faced that kind of racism, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. Marcus exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cold air. People like Karen weren't rare, and while she was being held accountable this time, so many others got away with it. The weight of knowing how deeply entrenched that kind of hatred was in society pressed on him. It wasn't just about Karen's words, it was about the countless moments of quiet bias, of unspoken judgments, of being made to feel like less. He clenched his fists briefly, then relaxed them, reminding himself of the support he had received from the passengers, the crew, and even strangers after the video went viral. Karen's actions might have tried to strip him of dignity, but the outcome had been different. He had stood firm, and for that, he allowed himself a small measure of pride. Small steps, he murmured to himself as he descended the courthouse stairs. Small steps toward a world where people like Karen couldn't so easily weaponize their prejudice. For now, it was enough. Marcus tucked his hands into his pockets and walked away, his head held high.